The year is 1645, and outside this cave called Reigondo, Japan is transitioning from centuries of war to an era of peace. Inside, Miyamoto Musashi, the most legendary swordsman in history, is dying. But instead of spending his final days in comfort, he is writing. His brush moves across rice paper with the same precision that once guided his katana through 61 jewels without a single defeat. From youth, his heart had been inclined toward the way of strategy. Starting with his first duel at age 13 when he struck down a strategist of the Shinto school. Now, at the end of his extraordinary life, he is distilling everything he has learned into two masterworks that will outlive him by centuries. These are not just books about sword fighting or military tactics. What Musashi created in that cave represents, perhaps, the most complete philosophical system ever developed by a single human being. His Goran no Sho, known as the Book of Five Rings, revolutionized strategic thinking far beyond warfare. His Dokado, the Path of Alaninus, contains 21 principles that cut straight to the heart of how to live with honor and purpose. Together, these works form a comprehensive guide to mastering not just combat, but life itself. But here's what makes Musashi truly extraordinary. When he looked back on his victories at age 30, he realized they were not due to his having mastered strategy, but perhaps to natural ability. The order of heaven, or that other school's strategy, was inferior. This moment of brutal honesty changed everything. After that, he studied morning and evening searching for the principle and came to realize the way of strategy when he was 50. Most warriors would have been satisfied with an undefeated record and legendary status. Musashi spent the next decade and a half digging deeper, questioning everything and developing a philosophy that transcends his era. He became a master calligrapher, painter, sculptor, and poet. He understood that true mastery in one area unlocks mastery in all areas. As he wrote, "If you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything." This is not just ancient wisdom. This is a complete operating system for human excellence. What you are about to discover is not just the philosophy of Japan's greatest swordsman. You are about to learn a way of thinking and living that has been tested in the crucible of life and death combat, refined through decades of deep contemplation and proven effective across centuries. Every principle we will explore has been forged in the fire of real experience. Every teaching comes from a man who staked his life on these ideas and never lost. To write these works, Musashi did not use the law of Buddha or the teachings of Confucius. Neither old war chronicles nor books on martial tactics. He drew from pure experience and original insight. What emerges is a philosophy so practical and profound that it speaks to anyone seeking to excel in any field. Whether you're an entrepreneur building a business, an artist pursuing mastery, a leader guiding others, or simply someone who wants to live with purpose and effectiveness, Musashi's complete philosophy provides the roadmap. Part 1. The foundation of all strategy. Strategy is not what most people think it is. When we hear the word, we often imagine generals moving armies across battlefields or executives planning corporate takeovers. But Miyamoto Musashi understood something far more fundamental. He declared that strategy is the craft of the warrior, and that commanders must enact the craft while troopers should know this way. However, his definition of warrior extends far beyond soldiers. Every person who seeks to master their life and contribute something meaningful to the world is walking the warrior's path. Think about your daily existence for a moment. You wake up each morning faced with countless decisions, challenges, and opportunities. How do you decide what deserves your attention and what does not? How do you respond when unexpected obstacles appear? How do you maintain your effectiveness when circumstances change rapidly? These are strategic questions, and how you answer them determines the trajectory of your entire life. Musashi taught that there are various ways in life. The way of salvation by the law of Buddha. The way of Confucius governing the way of learning. The way of healing as a doctor, as a poet teaching the way of poetry, tea, archery, and many arts and skills. Each person practices as they feel inclined. But here's the crucial insight that separates Musashi's approach from all others. He taught that the warrior's is the twofold way of pen and sword, and you should have a taste for both ways. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that true mastery requires both contemplation and action, both study and practice, both thinking and doing. Most people fall into one of two traps. Either they become perpetual students who read endlessly but never apply what they learn, or they become mindless actors who stay busy but never reflect on whether their efforts are effective. Musashi understood that excellence demands the integration of both approaches. You must think like a philosopher and act like a warrior. But strategy in Musashi's understanding goes even deeper than this. He explained that the way of strategy is the way of nature. And when you appreciate the power of nature, knowing the rhythm of any situation, you will be able to hit the enemy naturally and strike naturally. This is not just about physical combat. This is about aligning yourself with the fundamental principles that govern all successful action. Consider how water flows down a mountain. It does not fight the rocks in its path, but finds the most efficient route around them. When it encounters a cliff, it does not hesitate but drops with full commitment. When the terrain levels out, it slows and spreads, nourishing everything it touches. Water achieves its goal of reaching the sea not through force or struggle, but by understanding and working with natural laws. This is strategic thinking at its highest level. Now imagine applying this same principle to a business challenge. Instead of forcing a solution that creates resistance, you study the situation until you understand its natural dynamics. You identify where the energy wants to flow and align your efforts with that direction. You recognize when to push forward aggressively and when to pull back and wait for better timing. You work with human nature rather than against it. This is what Musashi meant by hitting the enemy naturally and striking naturally. The main difference that Musashi noted between the Ichi school and other strategists and schools is that other schools do not teach the broader meaning of strategy. Some of the world's strategists are concerned only with sword, fencing, and limit their training to flourishing the long sword and carriage of the body. In modern terms, this is like focusing only on tactics while ignoring strategy or perfecting techniques while missing the bigger picture. Most people spend their lives optimizing the wrong things. They become incredibly efficient at tasks that do not matter. They master skills that have no application to their real goals. They win small battles while losing the larger war. Musashi's approach demands that you constantly zoom out and ask the fundamental questions. What am I really trying to accomplish? Is this action moving me closer to or further from my ultimate objective? Am I fighting the right battle at the right time in the right way? These questions separate strategic thinkers from mere tacticians. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Musashi's strategic foundation is his understanding of universality. He taught that from one thing you can know 10,000 things. And when you attain the way of strategy, there will not be one thing you cannot see. This is not mystical thinking, but practical wisdom. When you understand the core principles that govern success in any domain, you can apply them everywhere. The principles that make a great swordsman also make a great entrepreneur. Timing, distance, rhythm, adaptability, preparation, focus, and commitment. The mindset that wins duels also wins negotiations. Calm alertness, strategic thinking, reading your opponent, controlling your emotions, and acting decisively at the right moment. The discipline that creates martial mastery also creates mastery in art, science, relationships, and any other field you can imagine. This is why studying Musashi's philosophy is not just about learning historical curiosities, but about developing capabilities that apply to everything you do. Musashi emphasized that strategy is broader than mere sword fencing, and there is a strategy above sword fencing. This higher-level strategy is about understanding life itself. It recognizes that every action has consequences that ripple outward through time. Every decision either strengthens or weakens your overall position. Every relationship either adds to or subtracts from your capability to achieve your goals. Every habit either moves you toward or away from the person you want to become. The strategic mindset sees these connections where others see only isolated events. It anticipates second and third order effects where others react only to immediate circumstances. It builds systems that compound over time where others chase quick fixes that create new problems. This is the foundation upon which all of Musashi's other teachings rest. Master this foundation, and everything else becomes possible. Miss this foundation, and even the most sophisticated techniques will fail you when it matters most. As Musashi wrote, "You must study hard, and when you attain the way of strategy, there will not be one thing you cannot see." This is not just about seeing with your eyes, but perceiving with your entire being the underlying patterns that govern success and failure in all aspects of life. Part 2. The Earth Book. Building Unshakable Foundations. The Earth represents everything solid, reliable, and fundamental. When Musashi wrote about the Earth Book, he was teaching us how to build a foundation so strong that nothing can shake it. Think about the most successful people you know. What separates them from everyone else is not luck or talent, but the solidity of their foundational principles. They have developed core capabilities that support everything else they do. They have established ways of thinking and operating that remain consistent regardless of external circumstances. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to build impressive structures on weak foundations. They chase advanced techniques before mastering basic principles. They focus on outcomes instead of processes. They want to appear successful rather than becoming genuinely capable. Musashi understood that this approach always leads to eventual collapse. In the Earth Book, Musashi teaches his students of the Ichi school to know the smallest things and the biggest things, the shallowest things and the deepest things, as if it were a straight road mapped out on the ground. This means developing the ability to see patterns and connections that others miss. It means understanding how details relate to the big picture and how surface appearances reflect deeper realities. Let me give you a concrete example. Most people approach learning a new skill by jumping immediately to the flashy advanced techniques. They want to skip the boring fundamentals and get to the exciting parts. But Musashi would spend months or even years perfecting basic movements until they became absolutely natural. He understood that advanced techniques are just combinations of basic elements executed with perfect timing and precision. If your basics are weak, your advanced techniques will always be unstable. This same principle applies to everything in life. If you want to build a successful business, you must first master the fundamentals of understanding customers, creating value, managing resources, and executing consistently. If you want to develop meaningful relationships, you must first master the basics of listening, empathy, communication, and reliability. If you want to achieve anything significant, you must first build the character traits and habits that make success inevitable. The Earth's Book also teaches us about the importance of knowing your tools and environment. Musashi spent enormous amounts of time studying the characteristics of different weapons, the effects of various terrains, and the advantages and disadvantages of different positions. He understood that mastery requires intimate knowledge of the elements you work with. You cannot be effective if you do not understand your medium. In modern terms, this means becoming completely familiar with whatever tools and environments are essential to your goals. If you are building a business, you need to understand your market, your customers, your competition, your resources, and your constraints with absolute clarity. If you are developing a skill, you need to understand the principles underlying that skill, the common mistakes people make, and the most effective methods for improvement. Surface-level knowledge will always be inadequate when facing serious challenges. But the Earth Book goes beyond just technical knowledge. It teaches us about developing the right mindset and approach to learning itself. Musashi emphasized that you must study hard, but he also understood that effective study requires proper methods and attitudes. Random activity is not the same as purposeful practice. Reading about something is not the same as understanding it deeply enough to apply it under pressure. Knowing facts is not the same as developing wisdom. The Earth Foundation requires what Musashi called seeing truly. This means looking past superficial appearances to understand underlying realities. It means questioning assumptions and testing beliefs against actual results. It means being honest about your current capabilities rather than pretending to be more advanced than you actually are. Most people live in a fog of self-deception because facing reality feels uncomfortable. But you cannot build anything solid on a foundation of illusions. Consider how this applies to personal development. Most people want to change their lives, but they refuse to honestly assess where they currently stand. They set goals based on where they wish they were, rather than where they actually are. They choose strategies that sound appealing, rather than strategies that match their real situation and capabilities. They want transformation without the discomfort of acknowledging what needs to change. This approach guarantees failure because it skips the essential step of building on solid ground. The Earth book teaches us that true strength comes from accepting reality completely, and then building systematically from that foundation. This requires patience because foundational work is often invisible and unglamorous. It requires discipline because basic practice can feel boring compared to advanced techniques. It requires humility because you must admit what you do not know and start from the beginning. But it also provides something that no shortcut can ever deliver: unshakable confidence that comes from genuine competence. When your foundation is solid, you can adapt to any situation because you understand the principles underlying all situations. When your basics are perfect, you can improvise freely because you have a reliable base to return to. When your knowledge is deep rather than wide, you can see connections and possibilities that remain hidden to people with superficial understanding. This is what Musashi meant when he said that from one thing you can know 10,000 things. The Earth's book also emphasizes the importance of building your foundation in the right sequence. Musashi understood that some capabilities must be developed before others can be effective. You cannot learn advanced strategy until you have mastered basic techniques. You cannot develop intuitive timing until you have first learned to execute deliberately. You cannot transcend rules until you have first internalized them completely. Trying to skip steps in this sequence leads to confusion and eventual failure. This sequential approach requires enormous patience in a world that promises instant results. But Musashi knew that anything worth achieving takes time to build properly. The Earth's foundation is not something you establish once and then forget about. It requires constant attention and refinement throughout your entire development. Even at the highest levels of mastery, you must regularly return to basics to ensure they remain sharp and clean. The Earth supports everything else, so it must be maintained with the greatest care. Part 3. The Water Book. The Art of Flowing Adaptation. Water is the most powerful force on Earth, yet it appears completely soft and yielding. Over time, water carves the Grand Canyon, yet it never fights the rock directly. Water flows around obstacles, finds the path of least resistance. It eventually reaches its destination no matter what stands in its way. When Musashi wrote the Water Book, he was teaching us how to develop this same kind of adaptive power in our own lives. Most people approach challenges like a hammer approaching a nail. They apply force directly and hope to overpower whatever resists them. When this approach fails, they apply more force. When that fails, they become frustrated and either give up or exhaust themselves through futile struggle. Musashi understood that this direct approach works only in very limited circumstances. True mastery requires the ability to adapt your approach to match the nature of each specific situation. The Water Book describes Musashi's revolutionary fighting style, Nitten Ichu, which means two heavens as one. Instead of using both hands on a single sword like everyone else, Musashi wielded a long sword in one hand and a short sword in the other. This gave him multiple options in every situation. He could attack and defend simultaneously. He could adapt to close quarters or open spaces. He could respond to different types of opponents with different combinations of techniques. But the deeper lesson here is not about swords. It is about developing multiple capabilities that can work together in flexible combinations. In modern terms, this means building a diverse toolkit of skills, approaches, and perspectives that you can combine as circumstances require. Instead of becoming rigidly specialized in one narrow area, you develop complementary abilities that enhance each other. Think about the most successful entrepreneurs you know. They do not succeed by being the best in the world at one thing. They succeed by being very good at several related things that work together synergistically. They can understand technology and business and psychology and communication. They can think strategically and execute tactically. They can lead and follow. They can be visionary and practical. This combination of complementary capabilities allows them to adapt to whatever challenges arise. The Water Book teaches us that adaptation requires maintaining perfect balance even while constantly changing. Musashi wrote that a spirit in perfect balance is also a physical presence in perfect balance. A presence that does not create weakness in the individual does not reveal weakness to the enemy. This means staying centered and calm regardless of external circumstances. But balance does not mean remaining static. Water maintains its essential nature while taking the shape of any container. In the same way, you must maintain your core principles and values while adapting your methods and approaches to fit different situations. Your character should remain consistent even as your strategies evolve. Your fundamental commitments should stay firm even as your tactics become flexible. This is the paradox of effective adaptation. Consider how this applies to leadership. Effective leaders maintain consistent values and vision while adapting their communication style to different audiences. They hold firm to their principles while remaining flexible about methods. They provide stability through their character while encouraging innovation in their teams. They can be tough when toughness is needed and gentle when gentleness is more effective. This is not inconsistency, but adaptive mastery. The Water Book also teaches us about the importance of timing and rhythm. Water does not flow at a constant rate. It moves quickly down steep slopes and slowly across flat terrain. It pools in low places and cascades over high ones. It responds to the landscape while maintaining its essential direction. This teaches us that effective action requires matching your pace and intensity to the demands of each situation. Most people either move too fast or too slow for their circumstances. They try to force rapid progress when patience would be more effective, or they hesitate when decisive action is required. They apply the same level of intensity to every situation instead of calibrating their effort to match what is actually needed. Learning to sense the appropriate rhythm for each situation is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. The Water Book teaches us that true power comes from understanding and working with forces rather than opposing them. When water encounters a rock, it does not try to move the rock directly. Instead, it flows around the rock while slowly wearing it away. Eventually, the rock becomes smooth and rounded, shaped by the patient persistence of water. This illustrates a profound principle about how lasting change actually happens. Direct confrontation often creates resistance and backlash. Indirect influence that works with natural tendencies is often more effective in the long run. This applies to changing organizations, influencing people, and even transforming yourself. Water also teaches us about the power of persistence without attachment. Water never gives up on reaching the sea, but it does not care which specific route it takes. If one path is blocked, it finds another. If it cannot go around an obstacle, it goes under or over. If it cannot flow, it pulls and waits for conditions to change, but it never abandons its fundamental direction. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the Water Book. Maintain absolute commitment to your deepest goals while remaining completely flexible about your methods. Be willing to change course, try new approaches, and even accept temporary setbacks as long as you never lose sight of your ultimate destination. This combination of strategic persistence and tactical flexibility is what allows water to move mountains and what allows people to achieve seemingly impossible things. The Water Book also teaches us about the importance of maintaining flow in our daily lives. When water stops moving, it becomes stagnant and eventually toxic. In the same way, when we stop growing, learning, and adapting, we begin to deteriorate. Staying in flow requires constantly exposing yourself to new challenges, new perspectives, and new possibilities. It means being willing to leave comfortable situations when they no longer serve your growth. It means choosing temporary discomfort over permanent stagnation. Part 4. The Fire Book. Mastering the Heat of Battle. When the moment of truth arrives, everything changes. All your preparation, all your strategy, all your careful planning suddenly gives way to the raw intensity of direct confrontation. The Fire Book deals with these crucial moments when everything is on the line. Whether you are closing a major deal, performing under pressure, facing a crisis, or pursuing an important opportunity, there comes a time when you must step into the fire and prove yourself. Most people perform well in comfortable, controlled environments. They can execute perfectly when there are no stakes and no pressure. But when the heat gets turned up, when time becomes short, when the outcome really matters, many people fall apart. Their carefully rehearsed skills abandon them. Their clear thinking becomes confused. Their confident preparation transforms into anxious hesitation. Musashi understood that this difference between practice performance and pressure performance is what separates true masters from mere practitioners. The Fire Book teaches us how to bridge this gap. The Fire Book focuses specifically on timing and the art of direct engagement. Musashi explained that timing is crucial in dancing and music, for they are in rhythm only if timing is good. Timing and rhythm are also involved in the military arts, shooting bows and guns and riding horses. In all skills and abilities, there is timing. But timing in combat situations requires a different level of precision than timing in peaceful practice. When lives are at stake, being even slightly off in your timing can mean the difference between victory and defeat. Think about the timing required in crucial business negotiations. There's a moment when the other party is ready to commit. And if you miss that moment, the opportunity may never return. There is a moment to push harder and a moment to pull back. There is a moment to make concessions and a moment to stand firm. Reading these moments correctly requires years of experience combined with intense presence in the current situation. You cannot rely on predetermined scripts when every situation is unique and constantly evolving. The Fire Book teaches us that effective action under pressure requires a specific type of mental state. Musashi wrote that in fighting and in everyday life, you should be determined, though calm. Meet the situation without tenseness, yet not recklessly. Your spirit settled, yet unbiased. Even when your spirit is calm, do not let your body relax. And when your body is relaxed, do not let your spirit slacken. This describes a state of relaxed intensity that allows maximum effectiveness under pressure. You are completely alert and ready to act instantly, but you are not tense or anxious. Most people under pressure become either too tight or too loose. When they are too tight, they cannot adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Their movements become rigid and their thinking becomes narrow. When they are too loose, they cannot act decisively when action is required. Their responses become sloppy, and their focus becomes scattered. The Fire Book teaches us how to find the optimal middle ground where we can be both relaxed and ready, both calm and committed. One of the most important lessons of the Fire Book is about reading the rhythm of engagement. Every confrontation, whether physical, intellectual, or emotional, has its own natural rhythm. There are moments when you should press your advantage and moments when you should step back and reassess. There are times for aggressive action and times for patient waiting. Learning to feel this rhythm and align your actions with it gives you an enormous advantage over opponents who try to force their own timing on every situation. This is what Musashi meant by hitting the enemy naturally and striking naturally. The Fire Book also teaches us about the importance of maintaining strategic perspective even in the heat of battle. When pressure increases, most people lose sight of their larger objectives and become focused only on immediate survival. They make short-term decisions that create long-term problems. They win tactical victories that lead to strategic defeats. Musashi understood that true mastery requires keeping both immediate tactics and ultimate strategy in mind simultaneously. You must be fully present to what is happening right now while never losing sight of where you are trying to go. This dual awareness is incredibly difficult to maintain under pressure. It requires extensive practice and gradually increasing levels of intensity. You cannot develop this capability by practicing only in comfortable conditions. You must deliberately expose yourself to higher and higher levels of pressure until you can maintain clarity and effectiveness, regardless of external circumstances. This is why Musashi fought so many actual duels rather than just practicing with wooden swords. He understood that real pressure cannot be simulated, only experienced. The Fire Book teaches us that effective action under pressure requires complete commitment, without attachment to outcomes. When you step into the fire, you must give everything you have to the situation at hand. Holding back or hedging your bets virtually guarantees failure in high-stakes situations. But paradoxically, you must also remain emotionally detached from the results. If you become too invested in a specific outcome, you will make desperate decisions that undermine your effectiveness. This balance between total commitment and emotional detachment is one of the most challenging aspects of pressure performance. You must commit completely to producing the best work possible within the time constraints. You cannot hold back effort or inspiration. But you also cannot become so attached to perfection that you freeze up or miss the deadline entirely. Must give everything you have while accepting that the result will be whatever it will be given the circumstances. This allows you to perform at your peak while maintaining the flexibility to adapt as conditions change. The Fire Book also teaches us about the importance of decisive action once you have committed to a course. Musashi emphasized that hesitation in the moment of engagement is usually fatal. Once you have decided to act, you must act completely and immediately. Partial commitment leads to partial results and often creates more problems than taking no action at all. This does not mean acting recklessly or without consideration. It means that once your consideration is complete, you must transition immediately to total commitment. The Fire Book teaches us that mastery under pressure comes from transforming challenge into opportunity, instead of seeing high-stakes situations as threats to be survived. Masters see them as chances to demonstrate their capabilities and push their development to new levels. They welcome pressure because they know it reveals aspects of their skill that remain hidden in comfortable conditions. This shift in perspective from threat to opportunity changes everything about how you prepare for and engage with challenging situations. Part 5, The Wind Book. Learning from all directions. Pride is the enemy of growth. The moment you believe you have found the one true way, you stop learning and start declining. When Musashi wrote the Wind Book, he was teaching us something that goes against human nature. Instead of focusing only on your own school, your own methods, your own beliefs, you must actively study everything else. Not to copy other approaches, but to understand them so deeply that you can see their strengths and weaknesses clearly. This understanding makes your own approach more effective and helps you avoid the blindness that comes from narrow expertise. The Wind Book is not concerned with Musashi's Ichai school, but with other schools of strategy. By wind, he meant old traditions, present-day traditions, and family traditions. He understood that it is difficult to know yourself if you do not know others. This principle applies far beyond martial arts. Whether you are building a business, developing a skill, or trying to understand any complex domain, you cannot achieve true mastery without studying alternative approaches. Your own way of doing things always seems natural and correct to you, but it is only one possibility among many. Most people study their competition only to find ways to attack or discredit them. They look for weaknesses they can exploit or mistakes they can avoid. But Musashi approached the study of other schools with a much deeper purpose. He wanted to understand the principles underlying their methods, the assumptions driving their strategies, and the contexts in which their approaches might be superior to his own. This kind of study requires intellectual humility and genuine curiosity rather than competitive jealousy. It means being willing to admit that others might know something you do not. Consider how this applies to business strategy.
Most companies
study their competitors to find ways to beat them in the market. They focus on pricing, features, marketing tactics, and other surface-level factors. But the most successful companies study their competitors to understand different approaches to creating value for customers. They ask questions like, what customer needs are they addressing that we might be missing? What assumptions are they making about the market that might be more accurate than ours? What capabilities have they developed that we should consider developing? This deeper level of competitive analysis leads to innovation, rather than just imitation. The Wind Book teaches us that studying other approaches helps you understand the context and limitations of your own methods. Every approach works well in some situations and poorly in others. When you only know one way of doing things, you tend to apply that approach everywhere, even when it is not appropriate. When you understand multiple approaches, you can choose the most effective method for each specific situation. This flexibility is one of the key advantages of broad knowledge over narrow specialization. You become like a craftsman with a full toolbox rather than someone who only owns a hammer. But studying other approaches also reveals something else that is equally important. It shows you the fundamental principles that underlie all effective methods. When you study enough different approaches to the same challenge, you begin to see patterns. You notice that successful methods, despite their surface differences, often share deeper similarities. They address the same underlying requirements, just in different ways. This recognition of underlying patterns allows you to extract principles that can be applied to entirely new situations. The Wind Book teaches us about the danger of becoming too attached to any particular method or tradition. Musashi observed that to all ways there are sidetracks. If you study a way daily and your spirit diverges, you may think you are obeying a good way, but objectively it is not the true way. If you are following the true way and diverge a little, this will later become a large divergence. This describes how even good methods can become corrupted over time if they are followed blindly rather than understood deeply. Understanding leads to stagnation and eventual irrelevance. Think about how this applies to professional development. Many people learn a set of skills early in their careers and then stop updating their knowledge. They become increasingly confident in their established methods while the world around them continues to evolve. Eventually, their expertise becomes obsolete. But they do not realize it because they have stopped paying attention to alternative approaches. They mistake familiarity with a particular method for mastery of the underlying domain. The Wind Book teaches us that true mastery requires constantly updating your understanding by studying how others approach the same challenges. The Wind Book also teaches us about the importance of understanding not just what other schools do, but why they do it. Surface-level copying of techniques rarely works because techniques are expressions of deeper principles and assumptions. If you copy the technique without understanding the principle, you will likely apply it incorrectly or inappropriately. But if you understand the principle, you can develop your own expressions of that principle that fit your specific situation and capabilities. This is the difference between imitation and innovation. Innovation comes from understanding principles well enough to apply them in new ways. Consider how this applies to leadership development. Many people try to copy the specific behaviors of successful leaders they admire. They notice that a particular leader uses certain phrases, makes certain types of decisions, or structures their organization in certain ways. But when they try to copy these surface behaviors, the results are usually disappointing. This is because those specific behaviors were expressions of deeper principles applied to specific contexts. Effective leadership development requires understanding the principles underlying effective leadership. It's not just copying the techniques of particular leaders. The Wind Book teaches us that studying other approaches should make you more confident in your own approach, not less. When you understand why you do things the way you do them, and when you have consciously chosen your methods after considering alternatives, your commitment becomes much stronger. You're no longer following your approach out of habit or ignorance, but out of genuine understanding and conscious choice. This kind of informed commitment is much more flexible and resilient than blind adherence to tradition. The Wind Book also warns us about the common tendency to judge other approaches by the standards of your own approach. This virtually guarantees that you will misunderstand them. Every approach has its own internal logic and its own criteria for success. To understand an approach accurately, you must temporarily adopt its perspective and evaluate it by its own standards. Only then can you make meaningful comparisons and extract useful insights. This requires intellectual empathy and the ability to think from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Part 6. The Void Book Beyond Technique and Knowledge. There comes a moment in every master's journey when all the techniques fall away. All the knowledge, all the strategies, all the careful planning becomes secondary to something much deeper. When Musashi wrote the Void Book, he was pointing toward the ultimate destination of all learning, a state where you no longer need to think about what to do because you have become one with the principles underlying all effective action. This is not mystical nonsense, but a very practical reality that every true master eventually discovers. The void represents freedom from the limitations of conscious thinking and the ability to respond perfectly to whatever arises. Most people misunderstand what the void means. They imagine it as some kind of mystical emptiness or spiritual transcendence that has nothing to do with practical effectiveness. But Musashi was intensely practical. Everything he taught was tested in life-and-death situations. When he wrote about the void, he was describing a very real state of consciousness that dramatically enhances performance in any domain. It is the state where knowledge becomes wisdom, where techniques become natural expression, and where thinking becomes intuitive knowing. The void is what happens when you have internalized principles so completely that you no longer need to think about applying them. Your responses become spontaneous and perfectly appropriate to each situation. You act from a deeper intelligence that sees patterns and possibilities that conscious thought cannot process quickly enough. This is why masters in any field often cannot explain exactly how they do what they do. They have transcended the level of conscious technique and entered the realm of embodied wisdom. Their knowledge has become part of who they are rather than something they possess. Think about a master musician improvising. They are not consciously thinking about scales, chord progressions, or musical theory. All of that knowledge is still there, but it has become so deeply integrated that it operates automatically. Their conscious attention is free to focus on higher-level concerns like emotional expression, connection with other musicians, and response to the audience. They can take musical risks and explore new territories because their foundation is so solid that they do not need to worry about basic competence. This is what the void state looks like in practical application. The void represents the culmination of all the previous books. The earth provides the solid foundation of knowledge and skill. The water teaches adaptability and flow. The fire develops the ability to perform under pressure. The wind provides broad perspective and understanding of alternatives. The void is where all of these elements integrate into seamless, effortless mastery. But you cannot skip to the void. You must progress through each stage completely before the next becomes possible. Musashi wrote that in the void is virtue and no evil. Wisdom has existence, principle has existence, the way has existence, spirit is nothingness. This describes a state where your actions are automatically aligned with what is beneficial and effective. You no longer need to struggle with internal conflicts between what you want to do and what you should do. Your desires and your principles have become integrated. Your personal interests and the greater good have become aligned. This integration eliminates the internal friction that wastes so much energy for most people. All your energy becomes available for constructive action. The void also represents freedom from the need for external validation. When you operate from the void, your sense of worth and direction comes from within, rather than from others' opinions or society's expectations. You can act according to your understanding of what is right and effective, without being swayed by criticism or praise. This does not mean becoming arrogant or ignoring feedback. It means having such a clear internal compass that external influences inform your decisions without controlling them. You can remain open to learning while maintaining your autonomy. But perhaps the most important aspect of the void is what Musashi called knowing that which does not exist by knowing things that exist. This refers to the ability to perceive possibilities and potentials that are not yet manifest. When you understand principles deeply enough, you can see how they might apply in situations you have never encountered before. You can anticipate developments before they become obvious to others. You can sense opportunities and threats that exist only as possibilities rather than actualities. This kind of perception gives you an enormous advantage in any competitive or creative endeavor. Consider how this applies to entrepreneurship. Successful entrepreneurs often seem to have an uncanny ability to spot opportunities that others miss. They can see market needs before those needs become obvious. They can anticipate technological trends before they reach mainstream awareness. They can sense when timing is right for ideas that seem premature just months earlier. This is not luck or mystical intuition, but the result of understanding principles so deeply that they can extrapolate from existing patterns to future possibilities. The void state also enables what Musashi called natural striking. This means responding to situations with perfect timing and appropriate force without conscious calculation. Your actions arise spontaneously from your deep understanding of the situation rather than from predetermined plans or reactive emotions. This allows you to be simultaneously more responsive and more consistent than people who rely heavily on conscious thinking. You can adapt instantly to changing circumstances while remaining true to your core principles. This is the ultimate goal of all strategic development. But how do you develop the void state? It cannot be forced or rushed. It emerges naturally from years of dedicated practice combined with constant reflection and refinement. You must master each level completely before the next becomes accessible. You must be willing to let go of attachment to techniques and methods that served you well at earlier stages but now limit your development. Most importantly, you must maintain what Zen calls beginner's mind, even as your expertise deepens. The void requires what Musashi called no mind or no preferences. This does not mean having no opinions or standards. It means not being attached to specific outcomes or methods. You can work toward goals without being dependent on achieving them in exactly the way you originally envisioned. You can use techniques without being limited by them. You can hold strong values without being rigid about how they are expressed. This flexibility allows you to respond optimally to whatever actually arises rather than trying to force reality to match your preconceptions. This is true freedom, and it is the ultimate fruit of all genuine learning. Part 7. The Path of Alaninus. Aranin's Final Wisdom. 5 days before his death, Miyamoto Musashi knew his time was ending. His body, worn down by decades of combat and the hard life of a wandering warrior, was finally giving out. But his mind remained sharp as ever. Sitting in his cave retreat, he picked up his brush one final time to write what would become his most personal and profound work. The Dokudo, the Path of Alaninus, was not intended for his students or for posterity. It was his attempt to distill a lifetime of hard-won wisdom into 21 principles that could guide anyone seeking to live with honor and purpose. Unlike his Book of 5 Rings, which focused on strategy and technique, the Dokudo deals with something much more fundamental. How to conduct yourself as a human being. How to maintain your integrity when the world around you lacks integrity. How to find meaning and direction when external structures fail you. How to live fully even when you must walk your path alone. These 21 precepts represent the culmination of everything Musashi learned. Not just about warfare and strategy, but about life itself. The word ronin literally means waveman, someone who drifts without a master. In Musashi's time, this was considered a shameful condition. When a samurai's lord died, honor demanded that the samurai follow him into death through ritual suicide. Those who chose to live were stripped of their social position and left to wander as outcasts. Musashi had been a ronin for most of his adult life, forced to create his own code of ethics and find his own sense of purpose without institutional support. This experience taught him lessons that no traditionally successful person could ever learn. But Musashi discovered something remarkable about the Path of Alaninus. When you cannot rely on external structures for meaning and direction, you are forced to develop internal resources that are actually more reliable and powerful. When you cannot hide behind titles and positions, you must develop genuine competence and character. When you cannot depend on others for validation, you must learn to trust your own judgment. When you cannot follow predetermined paths, you must learn to navigate by principles rather than rules. The Path of Alaninus, though difficult, leads to a kind of freedom and authenticity that most people never experience. The Dokudo is not a work of philosophy in the academic sense. Every principle in it was tested in the crucible of real experience. Musashi did not develop these ideas by thinking about them in comfort and safety. He developed them by living them through decades of challenge, uncertainty, and danger. These principles kept him alive when survival was not guaranteed. They kept him sane when isolation might have driven him to despair. They kept him growing when stagnation would have been easier. This practical foundation gives the Dokudo a weight and authority that purely theoretical works can never achieve. What makes the Dokudo particularly relevant today is that modern life increasingly resembles the Ronin experience. Traditional institutions like religion, community, and even family provide less structure and guidance than they did in previous generations. Career paths are less predictable, and security is less certain. People are expected to create their own meaning and find their own direction without clear models or support systems. In many ways, we are all Ronin now, forced to navigate an uncertain world with only our own resources and judgment. Musashi's hard-earned wisdom about how to thrive under these conditions has never been more valuable. But the path of Alaninus does not mean literal isolation. Musashi had students, friends, and meaningful relationships throughout his life. What it means is taking complete responsibility for your own development, decisions, and outcomes. It means not depending on others to provide you with purpose, motivation, or self-worth. It means being able to stand alone when necessary while remaining open to connection when appropriate. It means developing such inner strength and clarity that you can contribute to others from a position of abundance rather than need. The 21 precepts of the Dokudo cover every aspect of how to live this way. They address how to relate to pleasure and pain, success and failure, others, and yourself. They teach how to maintain your center when everything around you is changing. They show how to act with purpose and integrity even when no one is watching or rewarding you. They provide a complete operating system for autonomous living that does not depend on external validation or support. But they also require something that most people are unwilling to give. Living by these principles demands brutal honesty about yourself and your circumstances. It requires accepting responsibility for your choices and their consequences without blaming others or making excuses. It demands developing discipline and self-control without external enforcement. It requires finding meaning and motivation within yourself rather than seeking them from others. Most people prefer to remain dependent on external structures, even when those structures limit their potential, because autonomy requires too much effort and responsibility. The path of Alaninus is not for everyone, but it is available to anyone willing to pay its price. Each of the 21 precepts builds on the others to create a comprehensive approach to independent living. They are not just random pieces of advice, but elements of an integrated system. Together, they address the most common sources of suffering and ineffectiveness that prevent people from living up to their potential. They provide practical solutions to universal human challenges, like dealing with loss, managing desires, handling criticism, and maintaining motivation over long periods. They show how to transform obstacles into opportunities and setbacks into stepping stones. They teach how to extract value from every experience, even painful ones. But perhaps most importantly, the Dokudo teaches how to live without regret. When you follow these principles consistently, you know that you are doing your best with whatever circumstances you face. You are not wasting time on activities that do not serve your highest good. You are not making decisions based on fear, greed, or ego that you will later wish you could undo. You are building a life that reflects your deepest values and highest aspirations. This creates a sense of peace and satisfaction that no external achievement can provide. Part 8. The first pillar, accepting reality without resistance. The first precept of the Dokudo cuts through centuries of self-help advice with 4 simple words. Accept everything just the way it is. This is not passive resignation or giving up on your dreams. This is the foundation of all effective action and the beginning of real wisdom. Until you see reality clearly, without the distortion of wishful thinking or denial, you cannot respond to it effectively. Most human suffering comes not from reality itself, but from our resistance to reality. We waste enormous amounts of energy fighting against things that cannot be changed instead of focusing that energy on things that can be changed. Think about how much time you spend wishing your past had been different, regretting decisions you made or did not make, resenting things that happened to you or opportunities you missed, imagining how much better everything would be if only certain events had unfolded differently. All of this mental activity is completely useless. The past is completely fixed and unchangeable. No amount of wishing or regretting will alter it by even the smallest degree. But this resistance to what has already happened drains energy that could be used to create a better future. The same principle applies to your current circumstances. You may not like your financial situation, your health condition, your family dynamics, or your career prospects, but these are the conditions you must work with right now. Spending energy complaining about them or fantasizing about how they should be different prevents you from seeing the possibilities that actually exist within your current situation. Acceptance does not mean you have to be happy about your circumstances. It means you stop wasting energy fighting reality and start using that energy to work with reality. Musashi learned this lesson through brutal experience. As a Ronin, he faced constant uncertainty, social rejection, and physical danger. He could have spent his time feeling sorry for himself or raging against the unfairness of his situation. Instead, he accepted his circumstances completely and focused all his energy on developing his capabilities within those circumstances. This acceptance allowed him to extract maximum value from every experience, even difficult ones. It freed him from the emotional turmoil that consumes people who cannot accept their reality. But acceptance is much harder than it sounds. Your mind has a powerful tendency to create stories about how things should be rather than dealing with how things actually are. You develop expectations based on past experiences, cultural conditioning, or personal preferences. When reality doesn't match these expectations, you experience disappointment, frustration, or anger. These emotions feel justified because your expectations seem reasonable. But the problem is not that your expectations are unreasonable. The problem is that reality does not care about your expectations. Reality operates according to its own laws, not according to your preferences. Consider how this applies to relationships. You may have very clear ideas about how other people should behave. You may believe that if you are kind to others, they should be kind to you in return. You may expect that if you work hard and do your best, you should be recognized and rewarded appropriately. These expectations are not unreasonable, but they are not guarantees. Other people have their own agendas, limitations, and circumstances that influence their behavior. When you base your peace of mind on others behaving according to your expectations, you give them control over your emotional state. Acceptance means recognizing that others will behave according to their own nature and circumstances, not according to your preferences. This does not mean becoming passive or giving up on influencing others. It means working with people as they actually are, rather than as you wish they were. When you accept someone's current level of capability, motivation, or understanding, you can communicate with them more effectively. When you accept their limitations, you can find ways to work around those limitations or compensate for them. When you accept their strengths, you can leverage those strengths to achieve mutual goals. This kind of acceptance actually makes you more influential, not less, because you are dealing with reality rather than fighting it. The same principle applies to accepting yourself. You may not like certain aspects of your personality, your capabilities, or your history, but these are the raw materials you have to work with. Wishing you were different will not make you different. Only accepting what you are now and working systematically to develop what you want to become will create actual change. Self-acceptance is not self-indulgence or making excuses for your limitations. It is an honest assessment that allows effective action. You cannot improve what you cannot honestly acknowledge. Acceptance also means recognizing that change takes time and happens in stages. You cannot transform yourself overnight or skip steps in your development. You cannot force outcomes to happen faster than their natural timeline. Accepting the pace of real change prevents you from becoming frustrated and giving up when progress seems slow. It allows you to maintain consistent effort over long periods, because you are not constantly disappointed by unrealistic expectations. This patience is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. But perhaps the most important aspect of acceptance is that it frees you from the need to control things that are beyond your control. You cannot control other people's choices, market conditions, natural disasters, or the outcomes of your efforts. You can only control your own choices, efforts, and responses. When you fully accept this limitation, you stop wasting energy on futile attempts to control the uncontrollable. All that energy becomes available for controlling what you actually can control. This shift in focus is transformative because it moves you from a position of powerlessness to a position of empowerment. Acceptance is not a one-time decision, but a daily practice. Every day brings new circumstances that challenge your ability to see clearly and respond effectively. Every day offers new opportunities to practice working with reality rather than fighting it. The more you practice acceptance, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, it becomes your default response to any situation. This creates a foundation of inner peace and practical effectiveness that no external circumstances can shake. Part 9, the second pillar, purpose over pleasure. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. This second precept strikes at the heart of what undermines most people's potential for greatness. We live in a world designed to provide instant gratification. Food that delivers immediate satisfaction but long-term harm. Entertainment that feels good in the moment but leaves you empty afterwards. Shopping that provides a brief high followed by buyer's remorse. Social media that gives you quick hits of validation but erodes your attention span and self-worth. The modern world is engineered to keep you trapped in cycles of short-term pleasure-seeking that prevent long-term satisfaction and achievement. Musashi understood something that our culture has forgotten. True satisfaction comes not from getting what you want in the moment, but from becoming who you want to be over time. Pleasure is a byproduct of meaningful activity, not a goal worth pursuing in itself. When you organize your life around chasing pleasure, you become weak, dependent, and ultimately miserable. When you organize your life around developing your capabilities and contributing something valuable to the world, pleasure arrives naturally as a result of your efforts. But this kind of pleasure is deeper and more lasting than anything you can achieve through direct pleasure seeking. Think about the difference between the pleasure of eating junk food and the satisfaction of being an excellent physical condition. The junk food provides immediate gratification but makes you feel worse in the long run. Maintaining excellent fitness requires discipline and delayed gratification, but it provides ongoing satisfaction and capability that improves every area of your life. The same principle applies to every domain. The pleasure of avoiding difficult tasks is immediate but temporary. The satisfaction of developing the discipline to tackle challenging projects is deeper and more lasting. But avoiding pleasure-seeking does not mean becoming aesthetic or joyless. Musashi enjoyed art, poetry, and the beauty of nature throughout his life. The key is that he did not make pleasure his primary motivation or his ultimate goal. He found pleasure in activities that also served his development and his contribution to others. His art improved his mind and spirit. His poetry helped him express and clarify his insights. His appreciation of nature deepened his understanding of natural principles that he could apply to strategy and life. This is pleasure in service of purpose rather than purpose in service of pleasure. The problem with making pleasure your primary goal is that it creates a downward spiral. The more you focus on pleasure, the more pleasure you need to feel satisfied. What used to be exciting becomes routine. What used to be enough becomes insufficient. You need stronger stimulation, more novelty, greater intensity to achieve the same level of satisfaction. This leads to addiction, whether to substances, experiences, or behaviors. Eventually, you lose the ability to find satisfaction in simple, meaningful activities. You become dependent on external sources of stimulation to feel alive. Purpose, on the other hand, creates an upward spiral. The more you develop your capabilities, the more capable you become. The more you contribute to others, the more valuable you become. The more challenges you overcome, the more confident you become. Success builds on success, creating momentum that carries you toward increasingly meaningful achievements. This kind of satisfaction actually increases over time rather than diminishing. It makes you stronger rather than weaker. It connects you to something larger than yourself rather than trapping you in self-centered concerns. But developing purpose-driven motivation requires patience and faith. Meaningful achievements take time to develop. You must be willing to work for months or years before seeing significant results. You must trust that consistent effort in the right direction will eventually pay off even when progress seems slow or invisible. This requires a completely different mindset than pleasure-seeking, which provides immediate feedback. You must learn to find satisfaction in the process itself rather than depending on external results for motivation. Consider how this applies to skill development. Learning any valuable skill requires thousands of hours of practice. Most of this practice is not particularly enjoyable. It involves repetition, correction, and gradual improvement that can feel tedious. If you approach skill development looking for immediate pleasure, you will quit before achieving competence. But if you can find purpose in the development process itself, if you can appreciate the subtle improvements that come from consistent effort, you can sustain motivation long enough to achieve mastery. And mastery brings a level of satisfaction that no amount of pleasure-seeking can match. It connects you to something eternal and meaningful, rather than something temporary and superficial. The third precept: do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling builds directly on this foundation. Partial feelings are emotional reactions that arise from immediate circumstances rather than deeper understanding. When you are angry, you see only reasons to be angry. When you are excited, you see only reasons to be excited. When you are afraid, you see only reasons to be afraid. These partial perspectives can lead you to make decisions that seem right in the moment, but create problems later. Musashi understood that emotions provide valuable information, but they should not control your decisions. Fear might warn you of danger, but it might also prevent you from taking necessary risks. Anger might motivate you to correct injustice, but it might also lead you to say or do things you will regret. Love might inspire you to care for others, but it might also cause you to make decisions that are not in anyone's best interest. The key is to acknowledge your emotions without being controlled by them. Use them as information while making decisions based on deeper principles and longer-term considerations. This requires developing what Musashi called settled spirit, a calm center that remains stable regardless of external circumstances or internal emotional weather. This does not mean suppressing emotions or pretending they do not exist. It means developing the capacity to experience emotions fully while maintaining your ability to think clearly and act wisely. This kind of emotional mastery is essential for anyone who wants to achieve anything significant. Without it, you will be constantly blown off course by every emotional gust of wind. Part 10. The third pillar: perspective and detachment. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. This fourth precept contains perhaps the most radical shift in perspective that any human being can make. Most people spend their entire lives thinking deeply about themselves and lightly about the world. They obsess over their problems, their desires, their fears, their image, their comfort. They treat the vast complexity of existence as background noise to their personal drama. This self-centered perspective is not only a source of constant suffering, it also prevents them from developing the wisdom and capability needed to solve their problems effectively. When Musashi says think lightly of yourself, he does not mean having low self-esteem or diminishing your worth. He means not taking yourself so seriously that you lose perspective. Your problems, while real and important to you, are not the center of the universe. Your preferences, while valid, are not universal truths. Your current circumstances, while significant, are temporary and changeable. This lighter perspective on yourself frees you from the heavy burden of self-importance that makes everything more difficult than it needs to be. Most people make their problems worse by adding layers of mental drama to whatever they are experiencing. They do not just face a challenge. They face a challenge plus anxiety about the challenge plus worry about what others will think, plus anger at the unfairness of facing the challenge, plus fear about their ability to handle it. The original challenge might be manageable, but all the additional mental weight makes it overwhelming. Thinking lightly of yourself means dealing with what is actually happening rather than all the stories you create about what is happening. But thinking deeply of the world means something much more profound than just staying informed about current events. It means developing genuine curiosity about how things actually work. How do people really make decisions? How do organizations really function? How do the markets really operate? How does change really happen? How do natural systems really maintain themselves? Most people have superficial opinions about these topics, but rarely invest the time and effort needed to understand them deeply. This deep understanding is what allows you to work with reality rather than against it. It provides the foundation for effective action in any domain. Consider how this shift in perspective changes how you approach problems. When you think deeply about yourself and lightly about the world, you focus on how problems affect you emotionally. You spend most of your energy managing your feelings about the situation rather than understanding the situation itself. When you think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world, you focus on understanding the dynamics that created the problem and the principles that might solve it. This understanding often reveals solutions that were invisible from the self-centered perspective. It also reduces the emotional charge around the problem, making it easier to address calmly and effectively. The fifth precept, be detached from desire your whole life long, builds on this foundation of perspective. Detachment does not mean not wanting anything or not caring about outcomes. It means not being controlled by your desires or dependent on specific outcomes for your well-being. When you are attached to desire, you become desperate. Desperation leads to poor decisions because you are more focused on getting what you want than on acting wisely. Desperation also makes you vulnerable to manipulation by anyone who promises to help you get what you want. Detachment allows you to work toward goals without being enslaved by them. You can want something strongly while accepting that you might not get it. You can make efforts toward desired outcomes while remaining open to unexpected alternatives. You can care deeply about results while not letting those results determine your self-worth or peace of mind. This detachment actually makes you more effective at achieving your goals because you are not handicapped by anxiety about outcomes. It also makes you more resilient when things do not go according to plan. But perhaps most importantly, detachment allows you to act from wisdom rather than compulsion. When you are attached to desires, those desires drive your decisions, whether or not those decisions are actually in your best interest. You might know that something is bad for you, but you do it anyway because you want it so badly. You might know that a particular strategy is unlikely to work. You pursue it anyway because you are desperate for the outcome it promises. Detachment frees you from this kind of self-defeating behavior. It allows you to choose actions based on what is likely to be effective rather than what you most want to be true. The sixth precept, do not regret what you have done, completes this foundation of perspective and detachment. Regret is perhaps the most useless emotion human beings experience. It focuses your attention on the past, which cannot be changed, rather than the future, which is still open to your influence. It drains energy that could be used for constructive action. It often prevents you from taking necessary risks because you are afraid of creating more material for future regret. Regret keeps you trapped in a cycle of mental self-punishment that serves no constructive purpose. But avoiding regret does not mean making decisions carelessly or ignoring the lessons of experience. It means making the best decisions you can with the information and capabilities you have at the time. Then accepting the results without self-torture. Every decision teaches you something, even if the outcome is not what you hoped for. These lessons are valuable only if you can learn from them without drowning in regret about the costs of learning. When you approach decision-making with this attitude, you become more willing to take reasonable risks and more capable of learning from whatever happens. This creates an upward spiral of improved judgment and increased capability over time. Together, these three precepts create a foundation of mental freedom that makes everything else possible. When you think lightly of yourself, you are not burdened by excessive self-importance. When you think deeply of the world, you have the understanding needed for effective action. When you are detached from desire, you are not driven by compulsion or desperation. When you do not regret your decisions, you are not trapped by the past. This combination creates a state of clear-minded effectiveness that allows you to respond optimally to whatever circumstances arise. Part 11. The fourth pillar, emotional sovereignty. Never be jealous. Never let yourself be saddened by a separation. Resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor others. These three precepts, the seventh, eighth, and ninth in Musashi's code, deal with what might be the greatest source of human misery, emotional dependency. Most people give away their emotional sovereignty to circumstances and other people without even realizing it. They allow external events to determine their internal state. They become happy when things go their way and miserable when they do not. They feel good about themselves when others approve and terrible when others disapprove. This emotional dependency makes them weak, unpredictable, and ultimately ineffective. Musashi understood that true strength comes from maintaining emotional sovereignty, regardless of external circumstances. Jealousy is perhaps the most destructive emotion because it accomplishes absolutely nothing while consuming enormous amounts of mental energy. When you are jealous of someone else's success, relationships, or advantages, you are essentially saying that their good fortune somehow diminishes your possibilities. But this is rarely true. Most success is not zero-sum. Someone else's achievement does not prevent you from achieving similar things. Someone else's happiness does not reduce the amount of happiness available to you. Someone else's advantages might inspire you to develop similar advantages rather than resenting them for having what you lack. Jealousy blinds you to these possibilities by focusing your attention on what you do not have rather than what you could create. But jealousy also reveals something important about your values and priorities. You only become jealous of things you actually want. If you are jealous of someone's wealth, it means you value wealth more than you want to admit. If you are jealous of someone's relationships, it means you want deeper connections in your own life. If you're jealous of someone's recognition, it means you want to be acknowledged for your contributions. Instead of wallowing in these feelings, you can use them as information about what you actually want to pursue. Jealousy can become motivation if you transform it from resentment into inspiration. The question is not why do they have what I want, but how can I develop what they have developed? Separations are inevitable in human life. People move away, relationships end, loved ones die, projects conclude, phases of life complete themselves. If you allow yourself to be saddened by these natural transitions, you spend enormous amounts of time grieving things that cannot be changed. Musashi did not mean that you should be heartless or indifferent to loss. He meant that sadness about separation often prevents you from appreciating what you gained from the relationship. While it lasted, it also prevents you from remaining open to new connections and opportunities. Every relationship teaches you something. Every experience leaves you different than you were before. When you focus on the sadness of separation, you miss the value of what you received. When someone important leaves your life, they do not take their influence on you with them. The growth, insights, and experiences you shared become part of who you are. In that sense, meaningful connections never really end. They become integrated into your character and capabilities. Appreciating this continuity allows you to honor what was while remaining open to what might be. Resentment and complaint are perhaps the most common ways people waste their emotional energy. Resentment is anger about past events that cannot be changed. Complaint is dissatisfaction with present circumstances without commitment to improving them. Both focus your attention on what is wrong rather than what could be made better. Both create negative energy that spreads to others and makes collaboration more difficult. Both position you as a victim of circumstances rather than an agent capable of creating change. But the deeper problem with resentment and complaint is that they become habits. The more you focus on what is wrong, the more sensitive you become to things being wrong. You start noticing problems and injustices that you might have overlooked before. You begin to interpret neutral events as negative ones. Your default perspective becomes pessimistic and critical. This does not make you more accurate or insightful. It makes you less effective because you spend more time identifying problems than solving them. It also makes you less pleasant to be around, which reduces your ability to build the relationships needed for significant achievements. The alternative to resentment and complaint is what Musashi practiced throughout his life: radical responsibility. Instead of focusing on what others have done wrong, focus on what you can do right. Instead of complaining about circumstances, focus on how you can work within or around those circumstances. Instead of resenting past injustices, focus on creating better outcomes in the future. This shift in focus does not mean ignoring real problems or accepting injustice. It means directing your energy towards solutions rather than dwelling on the problems themselves. Consider how this applies to workplace dynamics. Most people spend enormous amounts of time complaining about their bosses, coworkers, company policies, or working conditions. This complaint creates temporary bonding with others who share similar grievances, but it rarely leads to actual improvement. The time and energy spent complaining could be used to develop skills that would make you more valuable, build relationships that would improve your working environment, or create opportunities to move to a better situation. Complaint feels like action, but is actually a substitute for action. It provides the emotional satisfaction of expressing dissatisfaction without the risk and effort of trying to create change. Emotional sovereignty does not mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means maintaining your ability to choose your emotional responses rather than having them chosen for you by circumstances. You can feel sadness about a loss without being overwhelmed by that sadness. You can feel anger about an injustice without being consumed by that anger. You can feel disappointment about a setback without being paralyzed by that disappointment. The emotion provides information and motivation, but you remain in control of how you interpret that information and what actions you take based on that motivation. Developing emotional sovereignty requires practice in gradually more challenging situations. Start by noticing when external events trigger automatic emotional responses. Practice creating a small gap between the trigger and your response. In that gap, ask yourself whether this emotional response serves your larger purposes. If it does, feel it fully and use it as fuel for appropriate action. If it does not acknowledge it, and choose a more useful response. Over time, this practice develops into a natural ability to maintain emotional equilibrium regardless of what happens around you. This equilibrium becomes the foundation for all other achievements. Part 12. The fifth pillar: love, preferences, and freedom. Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. In all things, have no preferences. These 10th and 11th precepts address one of the most controversial aspects of Musashi's philosophy. How can someone live fully without being guided by love? How can someone make decisions without having preferences? These teachings seem to contradict everything our culture tells us about following our hearts and pursuing our passions. But Musashi is not advocating for an emotionless existence. He's pointing toward a level of freedom that most people never experience. The freedom to love without being enslaved by love, and to have preferences without being controlled by preferences. When Musashi warns against being guided by lust or love, he is addressing the tendency for intense emotions to override good judgment. Love can make you ignore obvious red flags in relationships. Lust can lead you to make decisions that compromise your long-term goals for short-term satisfaction. Romantic attachment can cause you to sacrifice your principles, abandon your responsibilities, or betray your other commitments. The intensity of these emotions feels like truth, but it is actually a form of temporary insanity that can lead to choices you will regret for years. Musashi had seen too many capable people destroy their lives by making important decisions while under the influence of powerful emotions. But this does not mean avoiding love or meaningful relationships. It means maintaining your center and your principles, even when experiencing intense emotions. True love supports your growth and brings out your best qualities. False love demands that you compromise who you are to satisfy someone else's needs or expectations. When you maintain your emotional sovereignty, you can participate in loving relationships without losing yourself in those relationships. You can care deeply for others without becoming dependent on their approval or presence for your well-being. This actually makes you a better partner because you bring strength and wholeness to the relationship rather than neediness and dependency. You love from abundance rather than scarcity. The principle of having no preferences is even more challenging to understand. Preferences seem natural and necessary for making decisions. How can you choose one course of action over another without preferring the first option? But Musashi is not talking about practical decision-making. He is talking about attachment to specific outcomes. When you are attached to having things go a particular way, you suffer when they go differently. When you are flexible about how your goals are achieved, you can adapt to changing circumstances and take advantage of unexpected opportunities. Having no preferences means being so clear about your fundamental values that you can pursue them through whatever means available. Consider how this applies to career development. Most people become attached to specific job titles, companies, or career paths. When those specific options are not available, they feel stuck and frustrated. They may turn down opportunities that do not match their preferences. Even when those opportunities might lead to better outcomes than their original plans, someone without attachment to specific preferences would focus on their deeper goals, developing valuable capabilities, making meaningful contributions, earning sufficient income, working with people they respect. These goals can be achieved through many different paths. Flexibility about which path to take opens up possibilities that rigid preferences would eliminate. It also reduces the anxiety and disappointment that come from being too attached to specific outcomes. Having no preferences also means being willing to face whatever circumstances arise without wishing they were different. If you prefer comfort, but life gives you challenge, you can embrace the challenge and extract value from it. If you prefer recognition, but your contributions go unnoticed, you can find satisfaction in the work itself. If you prefer success, but experience failure, you can learn from the failure and use it as preparation for future success. This flexibility allows you to thrive in any environment rather than being dependent on specific conditions for your effectiveness and well-being. It makes you virtually unbreakable because there is no external circumstance that can destroy your ability to find meaning and make progress. But perhaps the most profound aspect of having no preferences is that it allows you to see opportunities that attachment would hide. When you are rigidly attached to one specific outcome, you miss alternative possibilities that might be even better. When you are open to multiple possibilities, you can recognize and pursue the best opportunity available at any given time. This requires a level of trust in your ability to create value regardless of specific circumstances. It also requires faith that life tends to provide what you need, even if it does not always provide what you initially wanted. This trust and faith cannot be forced, but they develop naturally as you gain experience successfully adapting to changing circumstances. The 12th precept, be indifferent to where you live, extends this principle to physical environment. In Musashi's time, this meant being able to function effectively. Whether sleeping in a comfortable house or camping under the stars, in modern terms, it means not being dependent on specific environmental conditions for your productivity and well-being. Some people can only work effectively in perfect conditions. The right temperature, the right lighting, the right equipment, the right atmosphere. When these conditions are not available, their effectiveness drops dramatically. This dependency makes them fragile and limits their opportunities. Someone who is indifferent to where they live can be productive and content anywhere. They have developed the internal resources needed to create their own sense of comfort and focus, regardless of external conditions. This does not mean being indifferent to quality of life or accepting poor conditions when better ones are available. It means having the capability to thrive even when optimal conditions are not available. This capability is liberating because it expands your options and reduces your dependencies. You can take advantage of opportunities that others would reject because the environment is not perfect. You can remain effective during transitions and disruptions that would derail people who need everything to be just right. This adaptability is increasingly valuable in a world where change is constant and optimal conditions are rare. All of these principles work together to create a state of inner freedom that is independent of external circumstances. When you're not enslaved by emotions, attached to specific outcomes, or dependent on particular conditions, you become truly free. Not free to do whatever you want without consequences, but free to respond appropriately to whatever arises. Free to pursue your deepest values regardless of obstacles. Free to love without fear of loss. Free to strive without attachment to results. Free to enjoy comfort without needing it. Free to face difficulty without being destroyed by it. This freedom is the foundation of all mastery and the source of genuine happiness. It cannot be given to you by others or taken away by circumstances. It can only be developed through practice and maintained through vigilance, but once achieved it, transforms every aspect of your existence. Part 13. The 6th pillar, simplicity and independence. Do not pursue the taste of good food. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. These 13th and 14th precepts address the subtle tyranny of material comfort. Modern life constantly tempts us to complicate our existence with unnecessary luxuries, conveniences, and possessions. Each addition seems harmless or even beneficial in isolation. Better food, nicer clothes, more comfortable furniture, additional gadgets, upgraded equipment. But collectively, these accumulations create dependencies that limit your freedom and drain your energy. Musashi understood that simplicity is not deprivation, but liberation. The fewer things you need to be effective and content, the more opportunities become available to you. Food is one of the most obvious examples of how pleasure can become a prison. Everyone needs nutrition, but modern culture has transformed eating from functional fuel into elaborate entertainment. People spend enormous amounts of time, money, and mental energy pursuing sophisticated flavors and dining experiences. They become dependent on specific cuisines, preparation methods, or restaurant atmospheres for their enjoyment of meals. When these preferences cannot be satisfied, they feel deprived and dissatisfied, even when perfectly adequate nutrition is available. This dependency limits their ability to travel, work in different environments, or adapt to changing circumstances. Musashi approached food as fuel for his body and nothing more. This did not make him miserable or deprived. It freed him from the time and energy most people spend thinking about their next meal. It allowed him to eat whatever was available without disappointment or distraction. It eliminated the digestive problems that come from overeating or consuming elaborate combinations of rich foods. Most importantly, it prevented food from becoming a source of comfort that might undermine his discipline in other areas. When you do not depend on sensory pleasures for satisfaction, you must find satisfaction in more meaningful sources, like achievement, contribution, and growth. This shift actually increases your overall satisfaction because these deeper sources of fulfillment are more reliable and lasting than pleasure derived from external stimulation. The same principle applies to possessions. Every object you own requires some amount of mental and physical energy to maintain. You must store it, protect it, maintain it, and eventually replace it. You must decide where to put it and remember where you put it. You must insure it against loss and worry about its condition. Most importantly, you become psychologically attached to your possessions in ways that limit your flexibility and freedom. You cannot easily move to a new location because you have too much stuff. You cannot take risks with your income because you have too many expenses. You cannot pursue opportunities that require sacrifice because you are too attached to your current standard of living. Your possessions begin to possess you. Musashi was a wanderer for most of his life. Everything he owned had to be carried with him or left behind. This forced him to evaluate every possession by a simple criterion. Does this serve an essential purpose that justifies the burden of carrying it? Most things failed this test. He kept his swords, his writing materials, and little else. This radical simplicity gave him enormous freedom. He could go anywhere at any time without complex logistics or preparation. He could focus all his energy on developing his capabilities rather than managing his possessions. He could take risks that would have been impossible if he had been burdened with extensive property and possessions. This simplicity was not a limitation, but an advantage. But simplicity requires ongoing discipline. The natural tendency is to accumulate things over time. Something that seems useful in the moment becomes clutter when circumstances change. Something that provided value when you first acquired it becomes dead weight when your priorities evolve. Most people hold on to things just in case they might need them someday. But this insurance against hypothetical future needs costs real present freedom. Regularly releasing possessions you no longer need is like regularly cleaning out mental and physical space for new opportunities. It prevents stagnation and keeps you agile. The 15th precept, do not act following customary beliefs, addresses a different but related form of dependency. Most people follow social customs and cultural expectations, without questioning whether those customs serve their actual purposes. They do things because that is how it is done rather than because those things produce valuable results. They conform to social norms even when those norms conflict with their personal values or goals. This unconscious conformity limits their potential and prevents them from discovering better ways of living and working. It also makes them vulnerable to manipulation by anyone who understands how to use social pressure to influence behavior. Musashi lived outside conventional social structures for most of his life. As a ronin, he was already considered an outcast, so he had nothing to lose by questioning established ways of doing things. This outsider perspective allowed him to see possibilities that people embedded in traditional structures could not see. He could develop innovative fighting techniques because he was not constrained by orthodox schools. He could pursue learning in multiple disciplines because he was not bound by professional specialization. He could follow his own moral code because he was not dependent on institutional approval. This independence required courage and self-reliance, but it also provided opportunities for breakthrough thinking and achievement that conformity would have prevented. Most innovations come from people willing to challenge customary beliefs and conventional wisdom. But independence from custom does not mean rejecting all traditions or social norms. Many customs exist because they solve real problems or serve genuine purposes. The key is to understand the purpose behind each custom and evaluate whether that purpose is still relevant to your situation. Some traditions contain wisdom accumulated over generations that would be foolish to ignore. Others are outdated responses to problems that no longer exist. Still others serve the interests of particular groups rather than society as a whole. Thinking independently means making conscious choices about which customs to follow rather than following them all automatically. It means being willing to be different when difference serves your values and goals. The 16th precept, do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful, applies this principle specifically to skill development. In modern terms, this means not accumulating knowledge, tools, or capabilities beyond what you can actually use effectively. Many people become collectors rather than practitioners. They accumulate books they never read, tools they never use, and skills they never develop to competence. This collection activity provides the illusion of progress without the reality of capability. It disperses focus and prevents the deep development needed for true mastery. Musashi focused intensively on perfecting his two-sword technique rather than trying to become competent with every weapon available. This focus allowed him to develop innovations and insights that would have been impossible with a broader but shallower approach. He practiced calligraphy, painting, and poetry, not as separate hobbies, but as complementary disciplines that enhanced his understanding of principles applicable to all areas. Each activity reinforced and deepened the others rather than competing for his attention. This integrated approach to learning is much more powerful than scattered effort across unrelated domains. It creates synergies that accelerate development and lead to breakthrough insights. Part 14, the 7th pillar, mortality and honor. Do not fear death. You may abandon your own body, but you must preserve your honor. These 17th and 20th precepts address the ultimate questions that every human being must face. How do you live when you know you will die? What is worth preserving when everything physical is temporary? What gives life meaning when all achievements eventually fade? Musashi's answers to these questions were forged through direct confrontation with mortality in dozens of life and death duels. He understood that accepting death is paradoxically what makes it possible to truly live. And he understood that honor is the only thing that outlasts physical existence. Fear of death underlies most other fears. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of change, all trace back to the fundamental anxiety about mortality. When you are afraid to die, you become afraid to live. You avoid risks that might lead to growth because they might also lead to harm. You choose safety over opportunity, comfort over challenge, certainty over adventure. This defensive approach to life gradually shrinks your world until you are merely surviving rather than truly living. You become so focused on avoiding death that you forget to embrace life. Musashi understood that this is a form of death in itself, just slower and more painful than the physical kind. But confronting mortality does not mean being reckless or suicidal. It means recognizing that death is inevitable, regardless of how carefully you try to avoid it. Since you cannot prevent death, you might as well focus on living as fully as possible while you have the chance. This shifts your attention from defensive preservation to active creation. Instead of asking, how can I avoid loss, you ask, how can I create value? Instead of asking, how can I stay safe, you ask, how can I grow stronger? Instead of asking, how can I live longer, you ask, how can I live better? This shift in focus transforms fear into motivation and anxiety into energy. Musashi faced death directly in every duel he fought. This repeated exposure to mortality gave him a perspective that most people never develop. He knew viscerally that life is fragile and temporary. But instead of making him fearful, this knowledge made him fearless. When you've already accepted that you might die today, smaller risks become trivial. When you know that your time is limited, you stop wasting it on activities that do not matter. When you understand that everything physical is temporary, you focus on things that might outlast your physical existence. This clarity about mortality becomes clarity about priorities. The knowledge that you will die also frees you from many forms of social control. Much of human behavior is motivated by fear of various forms of social death: rejection, humiliation, ostracism, failure. But when you have accepted physical death, these social deaths lose their power over you. You can act according to your principles even when doing so is unpopular. You can pursue your goals even when others disapprove. You can speak truth even when it is unwelcome. You can take necessary risks even when failure is possible. This freedom from social fear is one of the greatest gifts that accepting mortality can provide. But if your body is temporary, what is worth preserving? Musashi's answer is honor, which he defined as living according to your deepest values, regardless of external circumstances. Honor is not about following social rules or meeting others' expectations. It is about maintaining integrity between what you believe is right and how you actually behave. It is about keeping your word, standing by your principles, and acting with courage when courage is required. It is about treating others with respect and yourself with dignity. Honor is what remains when everything else is stripped away. It is what others remember about you after you are gone. But honor is also what you carry with you every day. When you act with honor, you can face yourself without shame or regret. You know that you are doing your best to live up to your highest understanding of what is right. This creates an inner peace and self-respect that no external achievement can provide. It also creates trust with others because they know you can be counted on to act consistently with your stated values. This trust is the foundation of all meaningful relationships and collaborative achievements. People will work with someone they trust even if they do not like them. They will not work with someone they cannot trust, even if they find them charming. The 18th and 19th precepts. Do not seek to possess either goods or thieves for your old age, and respect Buddha and the gods without counting on their help. Round out this perspective on mortality and meaning. When you truly accept that you will die, you stop trying to accumulate security for a future that may never come. You focus on developing capabilities and relationships that provide meaning and satisfaction in the present. You recognize that your time and energy today are real and valuable. While your hypothetical future needs are uncertain and possibly irrelevant, this does not mean ignoring the future or making no preparations. It means not sacrificing present meaning for future security that cannot be guaranteed. It means investing in things that provide value regardless of how long you live. Skills, relationships, experiences, and contributions all enrich your life whether you have 1 year left or 50 years. Money and possessions only provide value if you live long enough to use them and remain healthy enough to enjoy them. These conditions cannot be assumed. Respecting spiritual traditions without counting on their help reflects Musashi's practical approach to the mystery of existence. He acknowledged that there are forces and dimensions beyond human understanding. He maintained humility about the limits of human knowledge and control. But he did not use spiritual beliefs as an excuse for inaction or irresponsibility. He did not expect divine intervention to solve problems that he could solve through his own efforts. He combined spiritual awareness with practical responsibility. This balance allows you to appreciate the mystery and beauty of existence, while taking full ownership of your choices and their consequences. It provides meaning without dependency and wonder without helplessness. Part 15. The eighth pillar. The way without end. Never stray from the way. This 21st and final precept of the Dokudo contains the essence of everything Musashi learned about how to live. But what exactly is the way? It is not a specific path or set of rules that applies to everyone. It is not a religious doctrine or philosophical system that can be memorized and followed mechanically. The way is something much more personal and profound. It is your unique expression of the fundamental principles that govern effective and meaningful living. It is the path that emerges when you align your actions with your deepest understanding of what is true, good, and valuable. For Musashi, the way initially meant the path of the sword. His commitment to mastering swordsmanship led him to develop the discipline, focus, and strategic thinking that became the foundation for everything else he achieved. But as his understanding deepened, he realized that the principles underlying effective swordsmanship applied to all aspects of life: strategy, timing, balance, adaptability, presence, commitment. These elements were just as important, in relationships, art, and personal development as they were in combat. The way of the sword became the way of living with mastery and purpose. This expansion from specific technique to universal principle is what characterizes all genuine mastery. Your way might begin with business, art, athletics, service, or any other domain that captures your imagination and commitment. The specific starting point matters less than the depth of your engagement with it. What matters is that you pursue your chosen domain with enough intensity and persistence to discover the principles underlying all effective action. When you understand these principles deeply enough, you can apply them to any area of life. Your expertise in one domain becomes wisdom that enhances everything you do. This is what Musashi meant when he said that from one thing you can know 10,000 things. But discovering your way requires more than just pursuing your interests. It requires approaching your chosen domain with the attitude of a researcher seeking fundamental truth, rather than a hobbyist seeking entertainment. You must be willing to question conventional approaches and develop your own understanding. You must be committed to excellence rather than satisfied with adequacy. You must persist through the inevitable periods of frustration and apparent lack of progress that characterize all deep learning. Most importantly, you must remain open to insights that challenge your existing beliefs and methods. The way is discovered through practice, not theory. And it reveals itself gradually to those who commit themselves completely to the process. It cannot be learned from books or teachers, only verified through direct experience. Once you have found your way, the challenge becomes staying on it. This is much more difficult than it sounds. Life constantly presents distractions, temptations, and apparent shortcuts that seem to offer easier paths to your goals. Other people will question your methods and suggest alternatives that they believe are better. You will face setbacks that make you doubt whether your approach is working. You will encounter opportunities that require you to choose between immediate advantage and long-term development. Each of these challenges tests your commitment to your way. Those who consistently choose the long-term path over short-term benefits eventually develop capabilities that make them extraordinary. Those who compromise their way for temporary convenience remain ordinary. The difference is cumulative and becomes more pronounced over time. Staying on the way also requires constant refinement and evolution. The way is not a fixed destination, but a direction of travel. As you develop greater understanding and capability, your expression of the way becomes more sophisticated and effective. What seemed like mastery at one stage becomes the foundation for the next stage. You must be willing to abandon methods that served you well in the past, but now limit your continued development. You must be open to learning from any source that can deepen your understanding. You must balance confidence in your fundamental direction with flexibility about specific methods and techniques. This requires a rare combination of conviction and humility that few people manage to maintain. The way also has a moral dimension that cannot be separated from its practical aspects. True mastery is not just about developing capability, but about using that capability in service of something larger than yourself. When you have the power to influence others and shape outcomes, you bear responsibility for how you use that power. The way demands that you exercise your capabilities with wisdom, compassion, and integrity. This is not just an ethical requirement, but a practical one. Power used selfishly ultimately undermines itself because it creates opposition and resistance. Power used in service of the common good creates cooperation and support that amplifies your effectiveness. The way teaches you to become powerful enough to make a difference and wise enough to make a positive difference. Perhaps most importantly, the way provides meaning that transcends personal achievement. When you are truly following your way, you are not just pursuing your own goals, but participating in something eternal and universal. You are discovering and expressing principles that other seekers throughout history have also discovered and expressed. You are contributing to the ongoing human project of understanding how to live well. You are preparing the ground for future generations who will build on what you have learned. This connection to something larger than yourself provides a sense of purpose and significance that makes even difficult periods meaningful. It allows you to find satisfaction in the process itself, rather than depending on external recognition or reward. It transforms your personal development into a form of service. Never straying from the way means maintaining this sense of purpose and direction regardless of external circumstances. When you face success, you do not become arrogant or complacent, but use your achievements as stepping stones to greater service. When you face failure, you do not despair or abandon your path, but extract lessons that make you stronger and wiser. When others criticize or misunderstand your approach, you remain confident in your direction while staying open to valid feedback. When new opportunities arise, you evaluate them based on whether they support or distract from your fundamental purpose. This consistency creates a life of integrity where all your actions work together toward a coherent end. The way without end means accepting that mastery is a lifelong journey rather than a destination. There is always more to learn, more to refine, more to contribute. The goal is not to arrive somewhere, but to keep traveling in the right direction. Each day offers opportunities to deepen your understanding and improve your practice. Each challenge provides material for growth. Each interaction teaches you something about human nature and effective action. When you embrace this perspective, aging becomes enriching rather than diminishing because experience accumulates into wisdom. Death becomes meaningful rather than tragic, because you have used your time to develop something that outlasts your physical existence. The way transforms a temporary life into a permanent contribution. This is the ultimate achievement of human existence and the culmination of all genuine learning. Part 16. The Two-Sword Philosophy, Integration and Balance. In the heat of combat, most swordsmen committed both hands to a single weapon, believing that more force meant more effectiveness. But Miyamoto Musashi saw a fundamental flaw in this approach. When both hands grip the same sword, you have only one option: attack along the line of that single blade. If your opponent blocks or evades that attack, you must recover and reset before you can attack again. During that recovery time, you are vulnerable. Musashi's revolutionary insight was that wielding two swords simultaneously, one in each hand, created multiple options in every moment. You could attack and defend at the same time. You could threaten from different angles simultaneously. You could adapt instantly to changing circumstances without pausing to reset your position. This tactical innovation reflected a much deeper principle about how to approach any complex challenge. The two-sword philosophy, called Nit-Nayu, or two heavens as one, was not just about weapons. It was about developing complementary capabilities that enhance each other rather than competing for your attention. Most people approach skill development by trying to become extremely good at one thing. They specialize narrowly and hope that their single area of expertise will be sufficient for success. But this approach creates the same vulnerability that single sword techniques create in combat. When your one area of strength is blocked or becomes irrelevant, you have no alternatives. You must completely retool and rebuild rather than adapting your existing capabilities to new circumstances. This makes you fragile in a world where change is constant and unpredictable. Musashi's approach was to develop two different but complementary types of capability. His katana represented strength, directness, and decisive action. His wakiashi represented subtlety, flexibility, and strategic positioning. Together, they created a combination that was more powerful than either weapon alone. When one approach was blocked, the other remained available. When one created an opening, the other could exploit it. The two swords worked together as a system rather than just being two separate tools. This systematic thinking is what makes the two-sword philosophy relevant to modern life. Consider how this applies to professional development. Most people try to become the best in their field by focusing exclusively on technical skills specific to their profession. An engineer studies engineering. A salesperson studies selling techniques. A manager studies management theory. But the most successful professionals develop complementary capabilities that multiply the effectiveness of their core skills. The engineer who can also communicate clearly with non-technical audiences has enormous advantages over engineers who can only talk to other engineers. The salesperson who understands psychology and strategy can achieve results that purely tactical salespeople cannot match. The manager who can also see the big picture and think systemically can navigate challenges that defeat managers who only know operational details. These complementary capabilities do not replace technical expertise, but multiply its impact. The key to effective sword development is choosing capabilities that reinforce rather than conflict with each other. Random skills do not create synergy. The combinations must be chosen strategically based on how they work together to address the challenges you face. Musashi chose long sword and short sword because they address different aspects of the same fundamental challenge: winning sword fights. One provided reach and power. The other provided speed and maneuverability. Together, they covered all ranges of combat and all types of opponents. In the same way, your complementary capabilities should address different aspects of your fundamental challenges. They should provide options when your primary approach is blocked and alternatives when circumstances change. But developing sword capability requires a different approach to practice than single sword mastery. With one sword, you can focus all your attention on perfecting individual techniques. With two swords, you must learn to coordinate multiple actions simultaneously. This requires developing what Musashi called double awareness. Part of your attention manages your primary capability, while part manages your secondary capability. Both must operate smoothly without interfering with each other. This coordination takes much longer to develop than single skill mastery, but it creates much more robust and adaptable capability. You become able to handle complexity and ambiguity that would overwhelm someone with only single skill focus. The two-sword philosophy also teaches important lessons about balance and integration. Musashi emphasized that both hands should be equally capable. You should not have a weak hand that only supports a strong hand. Both capabilities should be developed to a high level and able to function independently when necessary. This prevents you from becoming overly dependent on your stronger capability. It also creates redundancy that makes you less vulnerable to setbacks. If something happens to temporarily limit your primary capability, your secondary capability can carry the load while the primary recovers. This resilience is crucial for long-term effectiveness in any challenging domain. But perhaps the most important aspect of the two-sword philosophy is the mindset it creates. When you have only one approach to any challenge, you tend to force that approach even when it is not well suited to the situation. When you have two well-developed approaches, you can choose the most appropriate one for each specific circumstance. This flexibility makes you much more effective because you're always using the right tool for the job. It also makes you more creative because you can combine elements from both approaches to create novel solutions. Innovation often comes from combining existing capabilities in new ways, rather than inventing completely new capabilities. The two-sword philosophy scales beyond individual capability to organizational and strategic thinking. Companies that depend on single products or markets are vulnerable in the same way that single sword fighters are vulnerable. Organizations that develop complementary capabilities in different areas can adapt to changing conditions more effectively. Leaders who can think both strategically and tactically, both analytically and intuitively, both individually and systemically, have more options available in every situation. The principle remains the same regardless of the level at which it is applied. Multiple complementary capabilities create more options, greater resilience, and higher effectiveness than single capability excellence. But the two-sword philosophy requires patience and discipline to implement effectively. It takes longer to develop two capabilities than to develop one. It requires maintaining focus on complementary development rather than pursuing the latest trends or opportunities. It demands that you resist the temptation to abandon one approach when it becomes temporarily difficult or less rewarding. The benefits only become apparent after both capabilities reach a threshold level of competence and begin working together as a system. This delayed gratification is challenging in a culture that values quick results and immediate feedback. But the long-term advantages of two-sword development make the investment worthwhile for anyone committed to sustained excellence. It transforms you from someone who has skills into someone who embodies capability. Part 17. The Art of Natural Action. Both in fighting and in everyday life, you should be determined, though calm. Meet the situation without tenseness, yet not recklessly. Your spirit settled, yet unbiased. This teaching from Musashi describes a state of consciousness that most people never experience. But that represents the ultimate goal of all training. Natural action is what happens when your capabilities become so deeply integrated that you no longer need to think about applying them. You respond to situations immediately and appropriately, without conscious calculation or deliberation. Your actions arise spontaneously from your understanding of the situation and your embodied mastery of effective principles. This is not reflexive or automatic behavior, but intelligent response that appears effortless because the underlying competence is so complete. Most people operate in one of two dysfunctional modes when facing challenges. Either they overthink everything and become paralyzed by analysis, or they react impulsively without adequate consideration. Overthinking creates tension and delay that prevents optimal response to rapidly changing situations. Impulsive reaction leads to poor decisions because it ignores important factors and long-term consequences. Natural action transcends both of these limitations by integrating thinking and acting into a seamless process. You perceive, understand, and respond as one fluid movement, rather than as separate sequential steps. This integration allows you to be both thoughtful and timely, both careful and decisive. You act with the speed of intuition backed by the reliability of deep knowledge. Consider how this applies to expert performance in any domain. A master surgeon does not consciously think about each movement during a complex operation. Years of training have integrated the knowledge and skills needed for effective action. The surgeon can focus full attention on reading the unique aspects of each situation. While the foundational capabilities operate automatically, a master musician does not think about fingering or breathing while performing. These technical elements have become transparent, allowing complete focus on musical expression and response to other musicians. The same principle applies to any area where true mastery is possible. Technical competence becomes the foundation for artistic or strategic expression rather than an end in itself. But natural action is not limited to specialized professional skills. It can be developed in communication, decision-making, problem-solving, and other general capabilities that everyone needs. When you have internalized principles of effective communication deeply enough, you can respond appropriately to any conversational situation without following scripts or formulas. You sense what the other person needs to hear and how they need to hear it. You calibrate your message to their current state and circumstances. You adapt your style to match what will be most effective rather than defaulting to your personal preferences. This kind of responsive communication creates much better outcomes than either mechanical technique application or impulsive emotional expression. It allows you to be simultaneously authentic and strategic, both true to yourself and effective with others. Developing natural action requires what Musashi called no mind or void consciousness. This does not mean emptying your mind of all content, rather achieving a state where knowledge and capability operate below the level of conscious attention. Your training creates a foundation of competence that handles routine aspects of any situation automatically. This frees your conscious attention to focus on the novel and unique elements that require creative response. Instead of using mental energy to remember techniques or worry about execution, you can devote full attention to understanding the current situation and choosing the most appropriate response. This division of labor between unconscious competence and conscious awareness dramatically increases your overall effectiveness. But achieving natural action requires a specific approach to training and development. You cannot skip the stage of conscious technique learning and go directly to unconscious mastery. The techniques must first be learned explicitly, practiced deliberately, and refined carefully. Only after they become reliable can they be integrated into unconscious competence. This process takes much longer than most people expect and requires much more repetition than feels necessary. You must continue practicing fundamentals long after they seem boring or obvious. You must resist the temptation to move on to advanced techniques before the basics have become completely natural. This patience with the development process is what separates people who achieve natural action from those who remain stuck at the level of conscious technique application. Natural action also requires developing what Musashi called proper distance in every situation. Physical distance in combat, but also psychological distance in relationships. Temporal distance in planning, and strategic distance in decision-making. Proper distance means being close enough to have influence, but far enough away to maintain perspective. It means being engaged enough to care about outcomes, but detached enough to see clearly. It means being responsive to immediate circumstances, but not overwhelmed by them. Most people get either too close to situations and lose objectivity, or too far away and lose effectiveness. Natural action emerges from finding the optimal distance for each specific situation and maintaining that.
Oh, yes.
Distance as circumstances change. This requires constant micro-adjustments based on real-time feedback rather than rigid adherence to predetermined positions. The development of natural action also requires integrating opposite qualities that most people see as contradictory. Determined yet calm, responsive yet unbiased, engaged yet detached, confident yet humble. These apparent paradoxes resolve at the level of natural action because each quality serves a different function and optimal response. Determination provides the energy and commitment needed for effective action. Calmness provides the clarity needed for accurate perception and sound judgment. Responsiveness allows adaptation to changing circumstances. Lack of bias prevents distortion of perception by personal preferences or expectations. Instead of choosing one quality over another, natural action integrates all necessary qualities into coherent response. Perhaps most importantly, natural action requires complete acceptance of uncertainty and impermanence. You cannot plan everything in advance or control all variables. Situations change faster than analysis can keep up with. New information constantly requires adjustment of previous understanding. Natural action emerges from dancing with this uncertainty rather than trying to eliminate it. You develop enough competence to respond effectively to whatever arises without needing to know in advance what will arise. This requires a fundamental shift from trying to control circumstances to developing the capability to respond optimally to any circumstances. When you make this shift, uncertainty becomes opportunity rather than threat, and change becomes energy rather than disruption. Part 18. The complete integration, pen and sword. The warrior's is the twofold way of pen and sword, and he should have a taste for both ways. This teaching represents one of Musashi's most profound insights about the nature of complete development. Most people assume that intellectual and physical capabilities are separate, domains that require different approaches and serve different purposes. Scholars develop their minds, but neglect their bodies. Athletes develop their bodies, but neglect their minds. Warriors develop combat skills, but ignore artistic sensibilities. Artists develop aesthetic sensitivity, but avoid physical challenges. This fragmentation creates incomplete people who are strong in some areas, but vulnerable in others. Musashi understood that true mastery requires integrating all aspects of human capability into a coherent whole. The pen and sword must be wielded by the same person for either to reach its highest potential. The pen represents everything contemplative, reflective, and creative. Writing, reading, thinking, planning, analyzing, imagining, and expressing. These activities develop your ability to understand complex ideas, communicate clearly, and create something meaningful from raw experience. They refine your perception, expand your perspective, and connect you to the accumulated wisdom of human culture. They allow you to extract lessons from your experiences and share those lessons with others. Without the pen, even the most dramatic experiences remain unprocessed and their value is lost. You repeat the same mistakes because you never understood what went wrong. You failed to build on your successes because you never identified what made them work. Experience without reflection is just accumulation without learning. It makes you older but not wiser. The sword represents everything active, physical, and direct. Damn. Training, practicing, testing, risking, performing, and engaging with concrete challenges that have real consequences. These activities develop your courage, discipline, resilience, and ability to perform under pressure. They force you to confront the gap between theory and practice, between intention and execution. They reveal which ideas actually work and which only sound good in comfortable discussion. They build confidence based on proven capability rather than untested knowledge. Without the sword, even the most sophisticated ideas remain abstractions that have no impact on reality. You become eloquent about theories you have never applied. You develop opinions about practices you have never attempted. Knowledge without application is just entertainment disguised as education. It makes you informed, but not capable. It provides the illusion of understanding without the reality of competence. But Musashi discovered something that few people realize. The pen and sword are not just complementary, but mutually enhancing when practiced together by the same person. Physical training develops mental qualities that cannot be developed through intellectual work alone. Discipline, persistence, tolerance for discomfort, ability to function under stress, these emerge from pushing your body beyond its comfort zone. Intellectual work develops qualities that cannot be developed through physical training alone. Pattern recognition, strategic thinking, ability to learn from others' experiences, capacity to communicate insights effectively. When the same person develops both sets of capabilities, they reinforce each other in ways that create performance far beyond what either could achieve separately. The disciplined body makes the mind more focused and resilient. The cultivated mind makes physical training more intelligent and efficient. Together, they create a person who can both understand what needs to be done and do what needs to be done. Consider how this integration manifests in different domains. The most innovative scientists combine rigorous analytical thinking with hands-on experimentation. They do not just theorize about how things might work, but build prototypes and test hypotheses directly. The most effective entrepreneurs combine visionary planning with operational execution. They do not just create business plans, but personally engage with customers, products, and markets. The most influential teachers combine deep subject matter knowledge with practical classroom skills. They do not just understand their material, but can convey that understanding effectively to students with different learning styles and backgrounds. In every field, the highest achievers integrate thinking and doing, rather than choosing one over the other. But this integration requires a different approach to development than most people follow. Instead of becoming narrowly specialized in either intellectual or physical capabilities, you must maintain active development in both areas throughout your life. This means reading and writing regularly while also maintaining physical fitness and practical skills. It means studying ideas and principles while also testing them through direct application. It means learning from books and teachers while also learning from experiments and mistakes. It means developing the patience for long-term intellectual development while also maintaining the urgency for immediate physical challenges. This balanced approach takes longer than pure specialization and requires more discipline, but it creates capabilities that cannot be achieved through any other method. Musashi demonstrated this integration throughout his life. He was not just an undefeated swordsman, but also an accomplished painter, calligrapher, sculptor, and poet. These artistic pursuits were not hobbies separate from his martial development, expressions of the same underlying principles. The balance, timing, and precision required for effective swordsmanship are also required for excellent calligraphy. The strategic thinking needed to win duels is also needed to compose compelling poetry. The discipline required for martial training is also required for artistic mastery. By developing these different expressions of the same fundamental capabilities, Musashi deepened his understanding of the principles themselves. Each domain taught him something that enhanced his performance in all the others. This integration also creates a different relationship with failure and success than most people experience. When you are developed in only one area, setbacks in that area can be devastating because your entire identity and capability is invested there. When you are developed in multiple areas, setbacks in one become learning opportunities that strengthen your development in others. The resilience you developed through physical training helps you persist through intellectual challenges. The analytical skills you develop through study help you understand why your physical techniques are not working. The creativity you developed through artistic expression helps you find innovative solutions to practical problems. This cross-pollination of capabilities makes you more resilient and more creative than someone who has invested everything in a single area. It also makes life more interesting because you can find fascination and meaning in many different types of experiences. But perhaps most importantly, the integration of pen and sword creates a kind of person who can bridge different worlds and translate between different perspectives. You can communicate with both intellectuals and practitioners because you understand both viewpoints from direct experience. You can see connections between ideas and applications that remain invisible to people who know only one side. You can serve as a translator between theory and practice, helping ideas become actions and actions become insights. This bridging function is increasingly valuable in a world where specialization has created silos that prevent effective collaboration. Organizations need people who can think strategically and execute tactically. Society needs people who can understand complex problems and implement practical solutions. The integration of pen and sword prepares you to serve this essential function. Part 19. The Rhythm of Mastery. Timing is important in dancing and pipe or string music, for they are in rhythm only if timing is good. Timing and rhythm are also involved in the military arts, shooting bows and guns and riding horses. In all skills and abilities there is timing. This insight from Musashi reveals something that most people miss about the nature of excellence. Mastery is not just about developing individual capabilities, but about learning to orchestrate those capabilities with perfect timing. You can have all the right elements but still fail completely if you deploy them at the wrong moment or in the wrong sequence. Conversely, modest capabilities applied with perfect timing can achieve results that superior capabilities cannot match when their timing is poor. Understanding and developing sensitivity to rhythm and timing is what transforms competent practitioners into true masters. Most people think about timing only in terms of when to act, when to speak up in a meeting, when to launch a product, when to make a career change, when to have a difficult conversation. But Musashi understood that timing operates at multiple levels simultaneously. There is the timing of individual actions within a sequence, the timing of entire sequences within a larger strategy, and the timing of strategies within the natural flow of circumstances. Master-level performance requires sensitivity to all these levels at once. You must sense the immediate rhythm of the current moment, while also feeling the longer rhythms of the situation and environment. This multi-layered awareness allows you to synchronize your actions with forces much larger than yourself. When you achieve this synchronization, your efforts are amplified rather than fighting against resistance. Consider how this applies to communication and persuasion. The same message delivered at different times can produce completely different results. Information that would be welcomed when someone is ready to hear it will be rejected when they are not ready. Advice that would be valuable at one stage of someone's development becomes irrelevant or even harmful at a different stage. Arguments that would be persuasive when someone is in a receptive state fall on deaf ears when they are defensive or distracted. Master communicators develop sensitivity to these rhythms of readiness and receptivity. They can sense when someone is open to new ideas and when they need time to process what they have already received. They know when to push forward with their message and when to step back and wait for better timing. This sensitivity makes them far more influential than people who simply deliver their message without regard for timing. They work with human nature rather than against it. The same principle applies to personal development and skill acquisition. There are natural rhythms to learning that cannot be forced or accelerated beyond certain limits. Periods of intense, focused practice must be balanced with periods of rest and integration. Times of pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone must be balanced with times of consolidating what you have learned. Phases of acquiring new information must be balanced with phases of applying that information in practice. Many people hurt their development by ignoring these rhythms and trying to maintain constant intensity. They burn out physically and mentally because they do not allow time for recovery and integration. They also miss the insights that come during quieter periods, when the mind processes and connects what has been learned. During active periods, business and professional timing operates on even longer cycles that most people fail to recognize. Every industry has natural rhythms of growth and consolidation, innovation and standardization, expansion and contraction. Every market has cycles of optimism and pessimism, risk-taking and risk avoidance, abundance and scarcity. Every organization has rhythms of change and stability, crisis and calm, focused execution, and strategic planning. Understanding these larger rhythms allows you to position your efforts to work with prevailing forces rather than against them. You can time major initiatives to coincide with periods when the environment is most receptive to change. You can prepare for downturns during good times and position for recovery during difficult times. You can recognize when trends are reaching their peak and prepare for the inevitable reversal. This macro timing sense is what allows some people to consistently make good strategic decisions, while others seem to have terrible luck. The difference is not luck, but sensitivity to timing. But developing timing sensitivity requires a different kind of attention than most people cultivate. Instead of focusing only on your own goals and activities, you must develop peripheral awareness of the larger context in which you operate. You must notice patterns and cycles that repeat over months and years, not just days and weeks. You must pay attention to subtle signals that indicate shifting moods and changing conditions. You must resist the temptation to force your preferred timeline on situations that have their own natural pace. This requires patience and the ability to wait for optimal timing, even when you feel ready to act. It also requires the ability to act quickly when the timing is right, even if you do not feel completely prepared. Most people do exactly the opposite. They hesitate when they should act and act when they should wait. Musashi's approach to timing was based on what he called knowing the rhythm of any situation. This means developing sensitivity to the natural flow of events and the optimal moments for different types of action. Every situation has its own unique rhythm based on the people involved, the stakes at play, the environmental conditions, and the historical context. You cannot apply predetermined formulas or rely on past experience alone. You must develop the ability to read the current situation in real time and sense its particular rhythm. This is more art than science, more intuition than analysis. It requires the kind of presence and awareness that comes only from extensive practice in actually engaging with challenging situations. You cannot learn it from books or simulations, but only from repeated exposure to real stakes and real consequences. But perhaps the most important aspect of mastering timing is learning to trust your sense of rhythm, even when you cannot explain it rationally. Often the optimal moment for action arrives before you have all the information you would prefer to have. Sometimes you must act based on subtle cues that you sense but cannot articulate. The rhythm of a situation can shift faster than conscious analysis can keep up with. In these moments, your internalized sense of timing must guide your actions. This requires developing confidence in your intuitive judgment through extensive calibration of that judgment against actual results. When your timing is good, notice what cues you are responding to. When your timing is poor, analyze what signals you missed or misinterpreted. Over time, this feedback process refines your timing sensitivity until it becomes reliable even in novel situations. This intuitive timing sense is what allows masters to perform optimally even under pressure, when there is no time for extensive analysis. Part 20. The Legacy of the Void. Living Beyond Technique. In the void is virtue and no evil. Wisdom has existence. Principle has existence. The way has existence. Spirit is nothingness. These final words from Musashi's Book of Five Rings point toward the ultimate destination of all learning and the deepest mystery of human existence. The void is not emptiness in the sense of lacking content, but fullness beyond the need for content. It is the state where all your training, knowledge, and experience have become so completely integrated that they operate without conscious direction. You no longer need to think about what to do because your entire being has become an expression of what you have learned. This is the state where technique transcends itself and becomes natural action, where knowledge becomes wisdom. Where practice becomes art, it is what every serious practitioner seeks, whether they realize it or not. It is the state where you are no longer using your capabilities, but embodying them. Most people never reach the void because they remain attached to their techniques, their knowledge, and their methods. They collect more and more information, develop more and more skills, and accumulate more and more experience. But they never let go of the scaffolding that helped them build their capabilities. They remain dependent on conscious control, explicit rules, and predetermined strategies. This dependency limits their responsiveness because conscious control is too slow for rapidly changing situations. It also limits their creativity because predetermined strategies cannot address novel circumstances. The void requires abandoning this dependency and trusting that your training has created something deeper than conscious knowledge. This letting go is terrifying for most people, because it means releasing the illusion of control that has guided their development. But the void is not a rejection of technique and knowledge. It is their fulfillment. You cannot reach the void by skipping the stages of technical development and intellectual understanding. These stages are necessary foundations that make the void possible. But at some point, the foundations must become invisible so that what they support can operate freely. A master pianist does not think about finger positions or musical theory while performing. That knowledge is still there, operating automatically, but it does not intrude on the musical expression that is the real purpose of the performance. The technique has become transparent, allowing something deeper to emerge. This is what Musashi meant when he said that spirit is nothingness. Not that spirit does not exist, but that it cannot be grasped or controlled directly. It emerges only when everything else is in place and then allowed to operate freely. It is the space between thoughts, the pause between breaths, the moment between intention and action. Living from the void means making decisions and taking actions that arise from your deepest understanding rather than from conscious calculation or emotional reaction. Your responses become perfectly appropriate to each situation because they emerge from wisdom rather than technique. You do not follow rules, but embody principles. You do not apply methods, but express understanding. You do not pursue goals, but serve purposes. This shift from doing to being transforms everything about how you engage with life. Instead of trying to control outcomes, you focus on embodying the qualities that naturally produce good outcomes. Instead of manipulating circumstances, you align yourself with the forces that shape circumstances. Instead of imposing your will on situations, you discover what each situation calls for and provide that. This approach is more effective than force and more satisfying than control. The void also represents freedom from the need for external validation or recognition. When you are operating from the void, your actions arise from internal compass rather than external expectations. You do what needs to be done because your understanding tells you it needs to be done, not because others expect it or reward it. This creates an integrity and authenticity that is immediately recognizable to others. People trust someone who operates from the void because they sense that this person's actions are guided by something deeper than self-interest or social pressure. They may not understand what guides the person, but they can feel that it is reliable and benevolent. This trust is the foundation of all real influence and leadership. It cannot be manufactured or manipulated, but only earned through consistent demonstration of wisdom in action. But perhaps the most important aspect of the void is that it allows you to serve something larger than yourself without losing yourself in that service. When you operate from the void, your personal interests and the common good become aligned. What serves your deepest development also serves others. What expresses your highest understanding also contributes to the greater wisdom. What fulfills your unique potential also adds something valuable to the world. This alignment eliminates the conflict between self-interest and service that troubles so many people. You can pursue your own growth and fulfillment while simultaneously contributing to others' well-being. This integration of personal and universal purposes is what makes life meaningful at the deepest level. The void is also where innovation and creativity emerge. When you are not bound by predetermined techniques or established methods, you can respond to each situation with fresh perception and original solutions. Your accumulated knowledge and experience become raw material for new combinations and applications. Rather than rigid constraints on what is possible, you can see opportunities that people trapped in conventional thinking cannot see. You can create connections between disparate elements that others consider unrelated. You can find solutions that others consider impossible because you are not limited by their assumptions about what can and cannot be done. This creative capacity is what allows some people to make breakthrough contributions while others remain stuck in incremental improvements. The difference is not intelligence or knowledge, but freedom from attachment to existing approaches. Reaching the void requires a paradoxical combination of intense effort and complete surrender. You must train rigorously and study deeply to build the foundation that makes the void possible. But you must also be willing to let go of attachment to the results of that training and study. You must work hard to develop your capabilities while remaining unattached to your identity as someone who has those capabilities. You must care deeply about your performance while remaining unconcerned about recognition for that performance. You must commit fully to your development while accepting that the ultimate goal is to transcend the need for development. This paradox cannot be resolved intellectually but only lived experientially. It is the final test of whether you are truly ready to embody what you have learned, or whether you remain attached to the process of learning itself. The void is not a destination you reach and then remain it permanently. It is a capacity you develop and can access when circumstances require it. There will still be times when you need to rely on conscious technique, analytical thinking, and deliberate planning. The void does not replace these capabilities, but provides an additional option when they are insufficient. It is the resource you can draw upon when facing situations that are too complex, too novel, or too rapidly changing for conventional approaches. It is also the state you can enter when you want to perform at your absolute best. Whether in competition, collaboration, or creation, having access to the void transforms you into someone who can handle any challenge and contribute to any situation. It makes you useful to others and fulfilling to yourself. It is the culmination of Musashi's complete philosophy and the ultimate achievement of human development. It is available to anyone willing to pay the price of complete commitment to the way.